A black car. A sealed folder. And one signature that turned a king into history, before the country even knew. This wasn't a coronation announcement, it was a quiet coup. And in this family, power isn't inherited, it's taken. Security men moved like predators, their murmured codes drowned beneath the machine gun stutter of camera shutters. In the lead car, Princess Anne sat stone-faced, her gloved hands gripping a folder that had already begun to poison the air around it. Upstairs, in a study lit like an interrogation room, King Charles stood over a desk, fists pressed into the wood. He had been warned the night was coming. He had not been told it would be tonight. And down the east corridor, Catherine stood in darkness, staring at her own reflection in the black glass, feeling, without knowing, that something had just broken. And stepped from the car without acknowledging the press. Cameras hissed, bulbs burst, voices clawed at her name. She didn't turn her head. The folder under her arm felt heavier than any scepter, the gold-embossed crest flashing under the courtyard lights before disappearing into the folds of her coat. Inside, the palace air was stale with heating and old carpets. The portraits along the marble corridor watched her pass, their painted eyes flat with judgment. She reached the king's study without knocking. Charles was standing, jacket off, tie loose, the lines around his mouth deeper than she remembered. "So it's here," he said. Not a question. And placed the folder on the desk as if setting down a loaded weapon. "The council signed it this afternoon. The date is sealed." He didn't open it. Didn't need to. The weight of the paper was enough. "You've moved quickly," he said. "You've moved too slowly," she replied. The silence after that was the kind that swallows entire conversations. Somewhere above them, the great clock in the west tower struck the half-hour. Its hollow chime bled into the east wing, where Catherine stood alone in her private rooms. The lights were off. Outside, the gardens dissolved into darkness. On the table beside her sat a small lacquered box. She hadn't opened it tonight, but she didn't need to. She knew what lay inside, the coronet from her wedding, wrapped in navy silk. And left the study without another word. In the corridor, a footman carrying a tray of tea stepped aside quickly, eyes down. She passed him without looking. In her mind, the ink on the document was still wet, still dangerous. In the kitchens, the staff spoke in low tones. Word had already filtered through, not from lips, but from the way guards shifted their stance, from the sudden appearance of Anne's car in the courtyard after dark. In palaces, news traveled without a sound. The next morning brought rain that flattened the gardens into grey shapes. Catherine walked the length of the south lawn in a hooded coat, the hem catching the wet grass. She paused by the old sundial, its shadow a thin blade across the stone. The air smelled of iron. She thought about the coronet, about the folder she hadn't yet seen, about the way Anne had looked at her the night before, a look that said everything without speaking. When she returned, Anne was waiting. The older woman didn't sit. She placed the folder on the table between them. "It's you," Anne said. Her tone carried neither warmth nor malice, only finality. Catherine opened it. The date stared back at her, a line of text as cold as the rain still drying on her coat. "What did Charles say?" she asked. Anne's jaw tightened. But it was inevitable. The words landed like a stone dropped into deep water, no splash, just a slow descent into something unseen. By evening, the press had it. A leak. A single headline, Catherine crowned, king to step aside. No quotes. No palace statement. Just the date. The palace press team scrambled, voices sharp, papers slamming on tables. Catherine sat through the meeting, hands folded, eyes fixed on the folder. Anne entered mid-discussion, her gloves still on. "It's out," she said. "We own it now, or it owns us." The announcement was pushed forward. Catherine would appear on the balcony with Charles and Anne. On the day, the forecourt was a crush of bodies, flags snapping in a bitter wind. Catherine stood between them, the air thick with the smell of damp wool and cold stone. Somewhere in the crowd, a chant began, quiet at first, then swelling, "Long live the Queen." Charles didn't react, but Catherine saw the tension in his neck. That night, she walked to the archive room alone. The knitted crown from the hospice visit lay where she'd left it beside a 1953 coronation program. She added the paper crown the children had made on her second visit. The gold coronet stayed in its box. She stayed there until the palace clocks marked midnight. The weeks ahead blurred, state dinners, rehearsals, measured fittings for robes she would one day wear under blinding lights. Gifts arrived from foreign dignitaries, a pocket watch engraved with the coronation date, a dagger with her initials inlaid on the hilt. She kept them locked away. 2 nights before the coronation rehearsal, she found herself in the chapel. The moon spilled fractured light across the altar. She stood in its center, her shadow stretching up the stone wall behind her. In that moment, she understood, this was not an honor. It was a pact. And pacts in this family always came with a price. The final rehearsal came and went under the eyes of hundreds of staff, each movement timed to the second. Catherine's face betrayed nothing. On the last night before the full public schedule was released, she walked the gardens again. The sundial's shadow was gone, swallowed by darkness. She thought about how time could disappear so easily, how a rain could vanish in the space between one breath and the next. In her private rooms, she lit a single lamp. The lacquered box sat on the table. She opened it, ran her fingers over the coronet, and then, slowly, closed it again. The crown could wait. Outside her windows the night was starless, the sky the color of extinguished coal. A gust pushed against the glass and then another, each one testing the frame like a patient hand. The lamp hummed softly, a pool of honeyed light that didn't reach the corners. On the mantel, a thin strand of smoke climbed from a candle snuffed an hour ago and refused to disappear. She moved to the window and touched the cold. The lawns below reflected nothing, only absorbed. Somewhere beyond the hedges, a fox barked once and went quiet, as if someone had put a finger to its throat. On her desk lay the pocket watch the foreign minister had given her, engraved with the coronation date like a threat pretending to be a blessing. She wound it twice and listened to the tiny tooth and gear heart catch, then set it face down so its ticking struck the wood. Time, contained for the moment, still insisted on being heard. The dispatch case arrived just before midnight. No knock. No footsteps. It simply appeared outside her door, red leather catching the lamp, its edges nicked by other knights, other signatures. She stared at the crest stamped into the lid. Someone had slid a note beneath the band, for review before first light. For words, no name, a sentence that shook loose a stone deep in her chest. She carried the case to the table and laid it beside the lacquered box, old ritual beside older ritual. Metal clasp up, leather cool as river rock. Inside, briefing sheets, draft schedules, a slim folder labeled with her initial. Underneath, an envelope thick with handmade paper. The seal was the king's. She did not break it immediately. She read the briefs with the method of someone learning to trust their own effort more than the outcome. Carriage rehearsals. Choir rehearsals. Security rehearsals that had nothing to do with music. A draft line for the proclamation that made the back of her neck tighten, with the unanimous council of family and sovereign estates. Unanimous was a word that did not tolerate questions. The envelope waited. For a moment she wondered who she would be when she opened it, woman, daughter-in-law, instrument. She slit the top with her nail and slid the paper free. The handwriting was neat in a way that disguised fatigue. It frightens me, the first line read, not quite a confession, not quite a warning. Not the ceremony. The speed. The way history makes a room inside you and moves in, rearranging the furniture while you sleep. You will do what is required. You always have. For that I am. The word after was smudged, could have been grateful, could have been sorry. There is no good timing for a crown. Only less terrible timing. Forgive the clumsiness of this hand. See. She read it twice, then folded it with care and slid it back into the envelope. She did not cry. The last time she had cried in this building a decade earlier she had sworn to herself she would do it only 3 more times within these walls, birth, death, and a private moment not yet earned. This was none of those. She placed the letter in the dispatch case, closed the lid, and pressed down until the clasp latched with a small, decisive sound. Then she switched off the lamp. The room darkened, and in the instant before her eyes adjusted, the coronet on the table seemed to float, an outline without weight, an idea pretending to be an object. She slept for 3 hours and woke in a half-dream of bells. The pocket watch had stopped, she had wound it too gently. She wound it again, firmer this time, and turned it face up. The hands pointed to a future other people had chosen. By dawn the palace had shed its night skin and put on its day face, clipped voices, floors polished to a mirror, urgent calm. She was scheduled to walk the North Corridor at 7 for a press still, no words, only light, only angles that suggested steadiness without vanity. Her dresser pinned something to the inside of her coat no one else would see, a thread of blue ribbon taken from the silk that wrapped the coronet. A superstition, maybe. Or a reminder that even in machines there are moving parts soft as breath. The photographer arrived with reverent efficiency, his assistant trailing cables like veins. He did not ask her to smile. He asked for a tilt of chin, a half-turn toward the light, a single exhale. The shutter's soft violence rippled the air. She held still the way statues hold still, in the way that requires work. When it was over, and was waiting by the doorway, hands clasped behind her back like a commander at inspection. "Walk with me," she said, and did not look to see if Catherine obeyed. They moved through a wing lined with battle standards and portraits whose colors had been bruised by decades. And didn't speak until they reached a narrow landing where a window admitted a pale spill of winter. "The first leak did less damage than it could have," she said. "We won't be that lucky twice." "Lucky," Catherine repeated, tasting the word. "Is that what we call it?" Anne's mouth bent, not quite a smile, not quite disdain. "We call it what the papers will print without giggling." "Who leaked?" "The same people who always leak," Anne said. "The ones who are frightened. Fear finds a phone." Then, after a beat that hinted at a concession, "We plug one hole, another opens. The work isn't to stop water. It's to keep the ship pointed where it must go." "You mean the crown?" Catherine said. "I mean the country." Catherine did not argue. She thought of the dispatch case. Of the letter smudged between grateful and sorry. She thought of the sundial's blade shadow and how it cut the day into pieces you were not asked if you wanted. The first rehearsal of the procession confirmed what the diagrams had implied, it would be a choreography of inches and breadth. Horses adjusted to cold metal and unseasonal noise. The carriage, repainted, regilded, reborn for a day that had not yet come, rolled out from its nest like something woken too early. In the chapel, the choir warmed their voices with vowels that began somewhere older than language. Security murmured to security. Pages learned the art of being seen without registering as human. From the dais, she watched someone lay down a narrow strip of red carpet and adjust it 3 times by less than a finger's width. She admired the fanaticism. A crown could be lost in a finger's width. So could a nation. That afternoon, a message reached her via a circuit no one could diagram. "You're bleeding in the North Corridor, check your step." She looked down and saw that one heel had cut the skin above her other ankle, a pin, dislodged, had worked its way where it shouldn't. She found it embedded in the hem, an ordinary mistake, or perhaps a little allegory the day had decided to write. She removed it, placed it in her palm, and closed her fist around it until the sting felt like a promise. The second leak cut deeper. A tabloid implied Catherine had pressed the king to hasten the transition, slipping words like ambition and calculated into paragraphs like hidden blades. The palace offered no denial, only a timetable. "Watch, and you'll know." That night she went unannounced to the hospice. A boy with spider-fine hair explained the difference between stars and planets, then gave her a drawing of a crown tucked into an invented constellation. She promised to keep it in the light. The nurse pressed a white knitted crown into her hand, its loose stitches sagging with fatigue. Back at the palace, she set it beside the other crowns and the lacquered box, a small altar of contradictions, gold beside things pretending to be gold. Close to midnight, Charles summoned her. In a small room that still smelled faintly of smoke, he said, "There's a phrase I can't say in public. I am stepping down because I am tired. Not of work," of being despised for doing it, and despised doubly for not doing it. You will be despised differently. I won't waste it, she said. He nodded once. On the table behind him lay the black state pen, heavy as a blade. By morning, the garden looked unfamiliar. Rain slicked the sundial, weeds curling at its base. At noon, the press convoy arrived, the palace rehearsing silence until 5. And moved through the afternoon like a metronome, pausing at Catherine's door. Consider a line in your address, a nod to continuity. The public likes to be nodded to. I won't apologize, Catherine said. No one's asking you to. Just don't flinch. I don't. I know. At 4:58, Charles stood at the balcony doors, studying his hands. The doors opened. Cameras caught small details invisible in real time, the way she angled her shoulder to hide her eyes, the way he leaned back to give her the frame, the way Anne's chin dipped once in quiet judgment. The chant rose, then faltered. Later, after the words that would be replayed and argued over and clipped into 1,000 unlicensed videos, after the wave, after the lengthened pause that suggested humility without conceding anything, the doors closed again. The sound stayed outside for a fraction and then fell silent as if cut with a knife. She went to the archive room alone. She did not tell anyone and did not take the usual route. Her heels on stone counted out the corridor. In the room, the air's coolness made her skin prickle. She opened the case that held the 1953 program and placed inside it the boy's drawing, the constellation crown glowing with orange crayon. Behind it she slid the white knitted crown. She left the first knitted crown where it was, beside the program, as if two versions of the same hope could keep each other company. The paper crown she carried back out with her and did not look at until she reached the chapel. In the chapel the candles were unlit and the light from the windows made a geometry she could not read. She sat in the back pew and placed the paper crown beside her. It rolled, then caught itself, flimsy dignity. She tried to imagine the sound the coronation oil would make leaving the ampulla, tried to imagine the story after the story, when cameras had left and the crown behaved like a roommate instead of a god. She stayed until the light shifted, then returned to her rooms. The dispatch case waited, a thin envelope inside, final confirmation. She signed. The pen was heavier than she expected, a drop of ink fell like a coin no one would spend. The days that followed wore the calm after thunder. Schedules multiplied. Tailors worked and reworked scenes until the thread vanished. She learned the power of a nod, and the unseen hands that tilted a robe just so. Rumors bred. A pundit called her ice in silk, an editorial praised her as efficient, the kind of compliment that hides a threat. On a wet Thursday, a child at the hospice died. She touched the door once, left no mark, and tied her blue ribbon to the handle. No one untied it. The night before Coronation Week, she dreamed of a room where every object had a heartbeat but none were hers. At dawn, she placed the pocket watch on the rain-slick sundial, modern time ticking against ancient stillness, then took it back. And appeared on the path. When the crown goes on, she said, stand still so the country can move. Move, and they'll call it tremor. Don't, and they'll call it cold. Do it anyway. At her door, and touched her elbow lightly, almost ceremonial. Inside, another parcel waited, the black state pen, no note. She set it beside the lacquered box, the false crowns, and the drawing that insisted the sky could be changed, looking at them as one looks at prayers half forgotten. From somewhere deep in the building came the first rehearsal bell, a sound that carried through stone and into bone. She closed the dispatch case, straightened her sleeve where the blue ribbon no longer lived, and drew one breath the length of a vow. The crown could wait no longer. But for the width of that breath, the width of a finger, the width of a stillness she made deliberately and no one saw, she waited anyway, long enough to feel the world arrive, and to decide to meet it standing. If you think this was the end of the story, you're wrong. The palace doesn't stop when the cameras leave, and neither do the secrets. Subscribe now, because the next move in this quiet war is already in play, and when it comes, it will rewrite the crown's future forever.